Well, good afternoon, everybody. And it's such a privilege to be with you at the National Humanities Alliance for inviting a biology major and a surgeon to address this distinguished audience of English majors and advocates for the humanities and the liberal arts. But as a physician and as a former president of a health science center and medical school, I support recent efforts to better prepare high school and university students for careers in science, in technology, in engineering and mathematics, otherwise known as the STEM fields. But underrepresented minorities, for example, are not currently pursuing STEM degrees in sufficient numbers. But as we increase attention and support for STEM studies, we should not do so at the expense of the humanities or the social sciences and fine arts. I am a firm believer that an undergraduate curriculum should offer balanced exposure to arts and sciences, even to students who are seeking professional degrees that require more specialized training like business, architecture, and engineering. So when I actually give counsel, to students who want to become doctors or other professionals in the STEM fields, I tell them that if you're going to succeed in being a physician or a scientist, you better learn how to write extremely well. You better learn how to articulate an argument and debate. And, you better be, a wise person way beyond the STEM fields, because that's the way you will navigate this world. Well, statistics from the Labor Department for the past 40 years tell us that the average American worker changes jobs 10 times in a lifetime. If that is the case, and let's just take that, as a fact, it might be a mistake to spend 4 or 5 years at college preparing for your first job, because it will not be your last. I'm just a perfect example of that. Biology major, physician, suddenly being struck by lightning, becoming president of a health science center, and then, you think lightning strikes only once, it struck me twice, and then they go, well, no good deed goes unpunished, go become Chancellor of the University of Texas system, and now you're responsible for, 90,000 employees and 230,000 students. So instead, it is wiser to learn skills that will prepare you for every job. And that's where the humanities and the arts come. It is so important for us to educate our future children to be independent thinkers, to be self-directed, to be problem solvers, to communicate well verbally and in the written word, to be open-minded. It's not necessarily the case that your opinion is always right. I tend to believe that, but I often get told no. It's important in our world, right, to be multiculturally sensitive and to be a team builder. And I think, part of that, I learned those lessons just growing up on the border between Texas and Mexico, and about how beautiful it is to not only learn a different culture, but learn a different language and, really the different arts that come from two, adjoining nations. So these are the attributes that I believe employers are seeking. So as a CEO, and as CEOs want employees who can communicate effectively and grapple with complex issues, but also grapple with those complex issues in an ethical way. Because whether we like it or not, your moral compass at times will get pushed in one way or another. And again, being true to yourself and being ethical and doing what is morally correct, requires that open-mindedness as well. And so on every level of education, K through 16, I actually have always emphasized prenatal, because it's families have a responsibility too in this journey. that one of our core values should be to nurture more sensitive, more thoughtful readers and writers, and to produce more reflective and caring and well-informed citizens of the world. And when you really think about that, I mean, that is the province of the humanities. Well, I served as a member of the American Academy Commission on the Humanities and Social Sciences, which began its work in 2011, and our final report observed that the strengthening of the humanities and social sciences should begin early on in childhood. In fact, I truly believe, it should begin, at the kindergarten level, because every year thereafter, you get logarithmically more behind. And it is also crucial that our young students experience excellent courses in literature, in history, and social studies, and civics, and composition classes that teach them to read and to write intelligently, to articulate and to develop the skills to think logically and construct a persuasive argument. And if I were to go back to my experience in public schools, I went to the Laredo Independent School District in the 1960s and the 1970s, and at that time it was the poorest school district in America. And when I graduated from high school, I wrote maybe 3 papers. And then suddenly you're dropped off at Yale, where it's 3 papers a week. And in fact, that experience almost tumbled my confidence because I was so far behind. And we really shouldn't have our children, have such a difficult time trying to navigate college because, you're having to undergo remediation in your writing skills. Well, I mean, I overcame that, but it wasn't easy. Well, as a Hispanic child educated in public schools in Laredo, which is really, on the Rio Grande River, the odds were absolutely overwhelming against my addressing you today. In fact, I think it would have been easier to win the mega lotto. But when I was growing up in Laredo was ranked, as I've stated, among one of the poorest cities in the United States. And I had no idea I'd be going to an Ivy League university. I had no idea I'd become a transplant surgeon or serve on national commissions appointed by the president or be selected as Chancellor of the University of Texas system, which is really, in many ways, a very important face of higher education in Texas and in the nation. But early in my life, my paternal grandmother, Josefina, began instilling the importance of education in her over 20 grandchildren. So let me just take you back, to the early 1960s, where every Sunday we would actually assemble as a collection of families, your aunts and your uncles and all your cousins. We'd all have lunch at somebody's house every Sunday. And, we'd alternate houses. But it was really quite an event, and it's like I remember this like it was yesterday. So all our cousins would attend, and my grandmother, otherwise known as Abuelita, basically held court. I mean, she was a matriarch. And there was an adult table and a kids table. And, of course, we'd always want to get to the adult table, but we would never get there. The waiting line was very long. But after lunch, a grandmother would call all her grandchildren to the table and give us each $1. I mean, imagine, $1 in the 1960s. How many super bubbles could that buy? At least 200. But she would say, here's your $1, and by the way, I'm going to take it back, and I'm going to put it in a little envelope, and when you graduate from high school, I'm going to give you this money, and it will help pay for your college. So very early on, we envisioned college or university like something like Disneyland. It's got to be fantastic. I mean, if we're already saving money for that, that's got to be terrific. I mean, I've sacrificed a super bubble for college. So, again, the importance of family, really inculcating the importance of lifelong learning. So she actually did put that money into a bank account, and when we graduated, she actually handed you an envelope and said, this is to help you pay, for your books and for your tuition. So very early on, academics were very important to all of us, and we received lots of positive reinforcement from our grandparents. And they certainly would get involved, and they would call you to say, I heard you got an A in science. And that was, of course, Josefina. But my maternal grandmother, Teresa, said, I read your English paper, and I loved it. So, we had the Josefinas who were STEM disciplined, and we had the Teresas who said, and I want to read your next Spanish paper, too. So it was this, really a wonderful way of growing up on the border. But one of the things it did do is it instilled a sense of confidence and purpose, in trying to learn as much as you could, no matter what the subject matter was. Well, at the age of 89, my father, who is still practicing medicine in Laredo at the age of 89, and he still makes house calls. Part of my earliest memories, and I think all of this has had an impact in my role as Chancellor and a champion for the humanities, is that one of my earliest memories of Dad is that he would bring us together around his little den at the house, and he'd read us excerpts from the great books. So he'd read excerpts from, Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and Shakespeare, and at first we thought it was the most boring thing in the world, but, it kind of caught on after a while. And he also loved music. And so, being the competitive person that I am, and I'm still pretty competitive, I decided to take on flamenco guitar, and I still play, the flamenco guitar to this day. So I have my parents to thank for encouraging my siblings. I mean, there's 10 of us, 5 sisters and 4 brothers, for us to read broadly, appreciate beauty, and enjoy life's wonderful mysteries, including the outdoors, because my grandfather was a rancher in Mexico. And so all of these memories, I believe, have made me a better person and a better champion for higher education. So a little bit about, the art of medicine, because it's not only a science, it's an art. So, again, when I was a boy, my father provided me with tremendous experiences and understanding the challenges faced by a really medically underserved region along the Texas-Mexico border. And so Dad, certainly growing up when I was, was very, very busy, one of the few physicians, on the border, and the way we would spend time with him was to actually make house calls with him, on the weekends. And, you'd go to some of the poorest parts of Laredo, but inevitably, every time he went to one of these homes, the grandmother or the wife of the patient or the husband of the patient would always give the kids a hug and give us candy, but you really learned that money's not everything. That culture and family ultimately end up being everything. So, seeing his love for his medical practice, I did receive firsthand, or at least the view, not only of the beautiful art of medicine, but how this art absolutely touches all classes from the poorest to the wealthiest without regard to economic status or homeland of origin. Because many of these patients weren't even American citizens. They were, individuals having to work in Laredo from Mexico. So this border region was and still is a place of significant healthcare disparities, many of which are still, very, very substantive public health issues, not only for Texas, but this entire country. So, I'm trying to convey to you that my father is a very ethical man, and his bedside manner remains exemplary to this day. But not everybody, grows up in this kind of experience or has a mentor, like my father has been to me, exposing me to goodness and to moral purpose. But every student, no matter who you are and no matter what your background is, can learn these lessons from the study of philosophy, from the study of theology, literature, history, and many other fields in the humanities. That's the beauty of the humanities and the liberal arts. So a combination of my father's example and my own studies of ethics and humanities actually led me to create a Center for Medical Humanities and Ethics when I served as the president of the Health Science Center in San Antonio. I absolutely wanted our medical students, our student nurses, and all of our health professionals in training to understand that the practice of medicine is both a science and an art. And I wanted our students to approach their work with compassion, with empathy, and a strong desire to heal. And in fact, now, about 7 or 8 years after we started this Center for Humanities and Ethics, every medical student is part of the curriculum of 4 years, of each of the 4 years of a medical student's education. And it's amazing to see the essays that medical students write during their first year of medical school, and then how that changes 4 years later, because now you get to see this. Well, I don't know whether you know Abraham Verghese, just a very gifted writer. He is a physician and a best-selling author who recently wrote Cutting for Stone. He actually was our very first director of the Center for Medical Humanities and Ethics. And for the past 11 years, the center has provided courses in global health, in literature and art, and real-world experiences on community service. In fact, we want our students to be a part of their communities and actually make some house calls. So students, as I've stated, are required to take these courses during their 4 years of medical school, and the center is regarded as adding great value now to the School of Medicine and to the community. And in fact, many students apply to Health Sciences in San Antonio because they want to be a part of the Center for Medical Humanities and Ethics. After a task force recommendation in 2004 and 4 years of additional planning, the University of Texas in Austin created a School of Undergraduate Studies to implement a revised undergraduate core curriculum for all UT students regardless of major. The core curriculum includes courses that are designed to give students a broader intellectual experience, and students are also introduced to a set of important skills in areas of study: writing, quantitative reasoning, global cultures, cultural diversity, ethics, and leadership. And this revised core curriculum represents UT Austin's commitment to expand beyond traditional boundaries to encourage students to become widely informed and well-educated citizens of the world. And they make every student do this now, which I think has been spectacular. Well, I will also add here that the University of Texas institutions are fully involved as well in using blended and online learning to enhance the educational experience, not to replace a teacher, but to augment, what a teacher can provide to their students. Because I do believe face-to-face instruction in the classroom and the laboratory is indispensable and absolutely invaluable. But I also think it is wise for us to explore the use of technology, even in the fine arts and the humanities. Certainly in clinical simulation, technology has really added a lot to the education of our students, but I think there's also a role in the humanities. As we explore the use of online technology, whether it's in the humanities and the arts, where there's a website's visual and interactive qualities can enrich the learning experience, and where digital delivery of information speaks directly to a generation of students deeply immersed in technology and social media. So 2 years ago, as part of this, the University of Texas system established the Institute for Transformational Learning, which aspires to make UT institutions world leaders in developing and implementing online learning. But online learning in a very positive way. So our founding director, actually a historian, is Stephen Mintz. And he's a prize-winning scholar and former director of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Teaching Center at Columbia. Steve and I have had wonderful discussions about how students can now access, in just a few seconds, the best museums and the best libraries in the world, and how the masterworks in music and literature are literally at their fingertips. I guess for me, it was Dad reading the great books. I think we can do a little bit better now by, bringing those great books and that great artwork directly to students. Now, I also think this is an opportunity to benefit our underserved populations, whether it's in Mongolia or to the colonias on the Rio Grande, in South Texas. We have 75,000 students along the Texas-Mexico border. The average family income in this area is about $25,000. And there is no philanthropy to be able to, buy artwork and buy books. I mean, there is philanthropy, but it's not, compared to UT Austin. And so we feel that this is a way to bring some of the great pieces of art and museums to our students. This year, we actually developed 9 massive open online courses, and in just a year, we've had 200,000 students be a part of this. So in this new and accessible world of online learning, what is the role of our universities? I mean, what's our role? Well, for centuries, we have been the keepers and the protectors of invaluable information, and we spoke about this in the commission. We're the keepers of our libraries, we're the keepers of art and natural history museums, we're the keepers of archives that are precious, where masterpieces, whether it be in paintings or in photography or medieval manuscripts, and that we display them and they're studied. On the UT Austin campus at the Blanton Museum of Art and at the Harry Ransom Center, we're now digitalizing all these images as well as making them accessible to a global audience. This will not replace, the experience of seeing great literacy and art treasures in person, but it will stimulate the imagination and introduce students around the world to the excitement of discovery. So I attended public schools in Laredo, as I told you, and I can recall still to this day every teacher I had from first grade to the high school, whether it was Mrs. Phelps or Mrs. Watts or Mrs. Garnett or Mrs. O'Connor or Mrs. Benavides. They, even though this was the poorest school district, they inspired me to have a tremendous love of learning. And I remember in 6th grade, Mrs. Garnett, and we had no zoning. I mean, everybody, the whole community was in the same class. And so one thing Mrs. Garnett did, she was a world traveler. And so on Friday afternoons at 3 o'clock, she would give us a slideshow from all the places she traveled. I could still see the Taj Mahal. It was just a fantastic experience, and she would give her, kind of her experiences in different parts of the world. And then after that, she would teach us etiquette. She'd have us bring our plates, our glassware, our forks and knives, and she would just teach us etiquette. And, a completely some of us knew how to eat, but obviously not well enough. So here's Mrs. Garnett, right, in 6th grade in the 1960s saying, you're going to learn some culture here in this class. So even though my mother herded her 10 children into our home study hall every school night and insisted that we spend 2 hours studying every school night, I was not prepared for Yale. To this day, that has been the most difficult challenge in my life, bar none. And despite my success in science and in math, I was not ready for Yale's liberal arts curriculum, especially, the written language. But in the long run, Yale prepared me for medical school and the academic rigors of the biosciences and medicine. And so in my experience, the sciences and the humanities were complementary and gave me a balanced education. I was just telling Ron a little story about my daughter, Barbara, who I thought was going to become a physician. We'd watch Grey's Anatomy on Thursday nights during high school, and I'd say, God, when am I no longer going to be an administrator and go back to the practice of medicine? And we'd daydream, and she would say, well, you ought to go back to medicine, Dad. And I go, well, honey, only if you study medicine. She goes, okay. So she becomes pre-med. She does very well. And then during her 2nd year, we were having a wedding in San Antonio, and so she flies down. And she goes, Dad, I need to talk to you alone. I said, oh my goodness. Sophomore at Yale, what could that mean? A, B, C, D, and E. And of course, I'm thinking of the worst. And she goes, I've got some serious news to tell you. And you just feel your adrenaline going up. She goes, medicine is looking a little glim. I go, oh. I'll support whatever you want. She goes, I want to go into film production. I want to make movies. And I go, well, have you spoken to your advisor? Yes, I have. And what did he or she say? Well, she says, Barbara, this is a liberal arts college. Take advantage of the humanities and the arts and forget pre-med. So I didn't have a chance. Well, as filmmaker George Lucas once observed, the sciences teach us how, the humanities teach us why, and Yale's emphasis on a well-rounded undergraduate education prepared me for these different paths that I have taken in medicine, in the administration of higher education, and eventually as Chancellor of UT. In my view, what medicine and higher education have in common is that they both save lives. In fact, I will tell you that education is the greatest public health initiative in the world. And it's the reason why ultimately I became Chancellor, because everybody told me to run away from this job, 6 years ago, because they said it's too political, you're not going to have a good time, everybody at the end of the day, ends up getting kicked out. Why would you want to do that? And so, I started thinking about it and certainly took that advice very seriously. But ultimately, the epiphany was education saves lives. And then out of self-interest, I figured, because 2/3 of our budget comes from our health science centers, that a doctor better be in charge. Self-preservation. So, you can just imagine my exhilaration when I was able to establish a new University of Texas institution in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, in deep South Texas. The valley is the southmost region of Texas and forms kind of a V shape between Rio Grande River and the Gulf of Mexico. It is an area where the population is 90% Hispanic, and 47% of the children in this region live in poverty. It is also where there are two universities under the UT system, UT Brownsville and the University of Texas Pan American, and now we are combining these two institutions to become a new university called the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and we're going to place a medical school within it. And so the new institution is going to have a presence in each major metropolitan area of the valley, immediately making the university the second largest Hispanic institution, Hispanic serving institution in America. So how in the world did this happen? And if I don't know whether you were following what was occurring in Brownsville, where a 20-year partnership between the Texas Southmost Community College and University of Texas Brownsville basically dissolved. The trustees of the community college wanted their independent community college, didn't want to be a part of the University of Texas, and then suddenly UT Brownsville lost a very important revenue stream. And so one of the great gifts of the University of Texas is that if you're a part of UT, you receive a distribution of an endowment called the Permanent University Funds, which is about a $16 billion endowment. 13 out of our 15 universities receive that, except for 2. UT Brownsville and UT Pan Ave, in an area that was 90% Hispanic. So I scratched my head. I go, well, that just doesn't seem right. And so everybody thought that me, being Hispanic, would be able to solve this problem. So I kind of read the Constitution, the whole bit. And the Constitution said that the only way you can be beneficiaries of this fund is if you're a new university. So we acquired UT Brownsville and UT Pan Am as community colleges in the 70s. So they weren't eligible for this fund. And now one of my campuses was going to basically die because of lack of financial resources. And so we brainstormed, again, lifelong thinking, critical thinking, debate, and we said, let's just create a new university. Let's combine Brownsville, Pan Am, build a medical school, call it UTRGV, go sell it to the legislature. And, you know, the first legislature said, this is stupefying. I didn't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. And about 30 seconds later, he said, I want to draft a bill. And so this past June, it passed unanimously both by the House and the Senate. And just 6 weeks ago, we allocated over $300 million to the Valley. All because of being open-minded and saying, you know, if we put our minds together, we can figure this out. Well, this is really a big deal because the human impact is going to be tremendous. And, you know, from an arts and humanities standpoint, I decided to draft some guiding principles for this university. I figured I'm chancellor. I got some privileges. I'm not going to write the vision statement or the mission statement, but I could write some guiding principles. And the new president could decide to take them or leave them. But the guiding principles state that this university will be bilingual, biliterate, and bicultural. So every student has to learn 2 languages and write 2 languages. I'm not telling them what languages, but you know, what an opportunity to create a new university and at least instill, you know, that as some guiding principles. So we have a unique opportunity to establish this institution at the intersection of the Americas, reaching out to our neighbors to the south, Latin America, and through student exchange programs and shared research, but also on the larger stage of commerce and culture and language. So I really believe UTRGV has the potential to become a major nexus of cultures. And students in the world interested in international bicultural programs will benefit from this global institution with opportunities to engage in programs connecting the Americas, North, Central, and South. This new university is going to have a medical school, and it's going to become poised to become a center of enterprise development that transforms the border economy into global economy. So this median salary of $25,000 is going to go up, which means more opportunities and more prosperity. So how is commerce related to the humanities? Well, in a recent article entitled The Economic Logic of the Humanities, which appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Professor Soll at USC wrote that there has been a recognition running from Aristotle and Adam Smith to the seminal economists of the mid-20th century that a society cannot long flourish unless economic activity and thought are grounded in the liberal arts. So the humanities were seen as a necessary component of a wealthy and stable society. And what a compelling argument Professor Soll makes. So philosophers, utilitarian thinkers, and economists have long valued the humanities and the classical studies as being central to our success and our democracy. Professor Soll points out that the 16th century Dutch humanist and poet Caspar Boelius saw economics and the humanities in perpetual reinforcement and envisioned a nation of merchant philosophers. Harry Ransom, one of my predecessors as chancellor and a remarkable scholar and book collector, established a world-renowned archive at UT Austin that contains literary manuscripts, authors' correspondence, photographs, theater materials like the original dresses from Gone with the Wind and the original script of Citizen Kane and the artwork of Frida Kahlo, D.H. Lawrence, and many other notable figures. So Chancellor Ransom called the humanities the arts of uncertainty. And he once wrote that the humanities confront all that is vague, changeful, unpredictable, immeasurable, unknown, and unknowable. That makes studying the humanities perfect preparation for shifting job markets and unusual career paths. So those who courageously confront the unknown and the unknowable, who are inventive, adaptable, and resourceful, will be tomorrow's leaders in business, in education, in technology, and public service. So our greatest hope is that if we strengthen support of the humanities and give them greater attention as they deserve, we will better educate a new generation of thinkers and innovators. We will advance civilization. We will move us closer to world peace, and we will provide a fulfilling life for our children and our grandchildren. So who today, I ask, can afford to ignore this vision of a better tomorrow? But let us begin with our young children. These are some of the many reasons why a surgeon and a man of science like myself deeply value the arts and the humanities, and why I am proud to have served on the American Academy Commission on the Humanities and the Social Sciences. So thank you, Ron, for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts with you today. I'm deeply, deeply honored to join you in support of the humanities and the arts, and you have my greatest admiration and respect. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I know it took a little longer than expected. Okay. Oh, yes. Way in the back in that burnt orange.
Understanding what is uncertain and immeasurable as one of the values that the humanities add. I'm wondering how you see them in the future, where a lot of policy is determined by quantitative evidence, and how assessment in the humanities has been structured very differently from assessment in the sciences for a long time, and how you kind of see that going forward, especially in the context of Texas, where I know that quantitative evidence has been very central to the policy discussion.
Well, two ways. I think that if you just take a look at the ability to articulate well, if I've got to go before the legislature asking for additional funds, you really can't measure the fact that you can articulate well, but your chances of actually succeeding in getting the resources that you need, certainly are helpful. If you just take a look at the facts based on the Commission's report on the humanities and start putting some quantitative measures, if you take a look at all the chief executive officers across this world, more of those CEOs come out of the liberal arts and the humanities than actually in the STEM fields. It's a fact. So I also, I got a lot of pushback just as recently as 4 months ago about actually linking and putting out in the website projected salaries of those who go into various fields, whether it's engineering, whether it's medicine, or whether it's English or anthropology. And, part of the pushback was, were you going to dissuade people from going into the humanities and the arts? Well, you actually take a look at salary trends 1 year and 5 years out. And that disparity diminishes significantly. And it's just actually being more transparent. And, by being more transparent, you actually eliminate those arguments. So, some things are truly immeasurable. I mean, at the end of the day, you just don't know whether a piece of artwork or discovery is going to actually, be seen 100 years from now as one of the greatest things in the world. I guess I will maybe close my remarks to you by a statement my daughter made when she was 12 years old, little Barbara, the one who's decided medicine was glim. So, I was no longer wearing my green scrubs anymore, and I was wearing a suit and a tie, and my beeper wasn't going off. And she goes, Dad, have you changed professions? I go, no, I'm still a doctor. Well, I don't know. You're just worried about money all the time, and your beeper doesn't go off anymore. And by the way, I'm really concerned about, all these pathways that you have to develop, to, how to take care of patients. It seems to me, Dad, that, you're going to actually suppress innovation and creativity. By having all these pathways, it doesn't allow people to think. I think we're going to die, out of just, this need of accountability all the time. So I said, honey, it's not so bad. So anyhow, it's a balance. And, we have to be, as administrators, definitely more accountable, but at the same time, we can't suppress creativity. Okay, thank you.